Hello again. This is Matt with Hanging with Maddie, and I'm here to do a video today. It's going to be a little bit long and unusual. This one is going to be called The Curious Tale of Donald Marshall. It's going to be about clones, the underground, and how the underground controls the surface world, and why we're seeing everything up here that's so satanic, and what it's all about. Like, why all the people that are in power are satanic, and why they do the things they do. They do them, in short, because they're part of a satanic corporation. All corporations are demonic and satanic. That was how the Satanists, or the underground satanic families, started this entire process of legalese, and it kind of started with Samaria and the Anunnaki. I'll kind of point that out a little bit, but so basically, we have the United States of America Corporation, and they're the people that own the corporation want to destroy, most of the world's population and control everything, and so the people that belong to this United States of the corporation of the world, which is a lot of the basically Illuminati, they have to do what their constituents want, which is, Satanists, and that's why they're destroying America as we see right now. That's why, in the latest news, the fact that the Georgia Guidestones were knocked down is, I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, but as far as I can see right now, apparently it's a good thing. Clearly, it was destroyed with what I believe is a energy weapon, like some sort of electromagnetic pulse or a gravitational pulse, definitely directed. So basically, a ray weapon or an energy weapon, which is what we're going to talk about right now, Richard Shaver. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit of Richard Shaver, and I will take some photos of the book, so you can pause it and read it yourself if you want to. But I'm going to do a little bit of a free reading here, and we're going to go through really quickly some of it leading up to this. And we're going to it's going to start in around the 30s or the 20s, with Richard Shaver kind of discovering all this and going into the caverns by the Taros, or the integrate energy beings that live down there, the beings that are good, the good beings, altruistic, or at least for humanity. Okay, so it starts off: my strength is dedicated to inform you of the key, the way to the kind of life that produced the beauty and wisdom of these immortal beings of the past. Okay, these beings are beings that we're going to talk about here. Beings whose actual existence has been proved 1,000 times to those who, like myself, have had actual experience in the caverns. This is Richard Shaver talking in his foreword. For we have seen and touched and used these antique mechanisms, and we know whereof we speak. But until today, those who knew have feared to broadcast their knowledge, for in olden times it would have meant being burnt at the stake, and today most certainly the insane asylum, which they do. Pause here. This is me talking now, Maddie. They do send people to these insane asylum, and when they're in there, they MK Ultra them, or they have it's a front. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But they definitely use insane asylums. And if you go to any abandoned insane asylum, that's where any haunted, like all these, people that search out ghosts and hauntings and the paranormal, it's always there, because they're probably on ley lines. They're definitely on ley lines. Same as the prisons. And all throughout especially the East Coast and throughout England, the prisons are on ley lines, and they're old Tartarian buildings that they turned over. And probably because they're Tartarian buildings, they go into the underground already. That's why they took them, and they're on ley lines, the energy lines. Okay, back to Shaver and his forward. It says here, Merritt, and that's who we got up here, Merritt. Abraham Merritt, the fictional writer, not writer. These are some of his books, so he does exist. So he here says that Abraham Merritt was writing the truth, and here's what he has to say. Merritt well knew, as do I, Abraham Merritt well knew, as do I, that the ancients had conquered death. I have set myself to tell you that I know of how they did so, and how plans carried out intelligently and with care can bring victory over death to modern surface men, as it did to those elders of long ago. It is not easy to achieve immortality. but a real start towards eventual success can be made. I am forced to tell you that the work of such writers as Merritt, Abraham Merritt, contains much that is not fiction, but must be presented as fiction because no one would print it in any other form. Thus, you readers who have not met the dark and unfathomable life of the hidden pits may take this bit of explanation as an effort to make an incredible story credible, in which case I hope the effort is successful. It is to those of you who either know or who believe me that I more significantly address myself. Very sincerely yours, Richard Shaver. Yeah, so that's another topic, especially around the turn of the century between 1890s all the way through to the 1940s and early 50s. A lot of fiction was the truth telling under the guise of fiction. And of course, you see amazing stories and all these other different sort of comic style pulp fiction that was going on back then, which included UFOs and aliens and all. So you can get quite a bit out of that. And sort of to validate that concept is if you go into the Men in Black movies and then they go look at the tabloids to get the real news. Well, that's basically what's going on here, because that's a lot of people. The normies will just disregard this, and you have to get this information out there. So now we flash forward until I'm not sure what year this is. I'm going to guess early 40s, maybe late 30s, because he did know about the Nazis. So I'm guessing that, it's going to be like 38 through like 44. Okay, so we're going to flash forward, and I'm going to go into my camera here. And, whoops, that's not my camera. Oh, that's me. Oops. No, hold on a second. Let's back to the camera. Sorry. And turn this around. And here we go. Okay, so he started hearing voices. This is how it all began for him. It began because he was hearing voices as he was welding, and it had something to do with the grounding of his welder. And they were saying things. They were basically Darrow. It was coming through as from his equipment, and he was hearing what they were saying. So here we go on the first part of this story. As he starts to hear these voices, it says, "The voice in my mind," and let's see. I'll just take a quick photo of that. Oops. Take a quick photo of this. And we'll just stay on that. Sorry, I'm kind of moving around. Anyway, he's hearing voices, and he says, they didn't make any sense. Even insane people make sense. But this last voice in my mind, which was, his hotel is cleared through. What does that mean? He dug the cellar of his house clear down to the caves, the voice explained. The voice in my mind had answered my question. I sat as though I'd been struck by lightning, but I still had some sense left in my head. I gasped out another question, this time audibly, and the man next to me turned to me and stared blankly. How deep is that? Was what I said. And the answer came. About 300 feet, said the voice, and suddenly there was a startled note in it, and it faded away. At the same time, I felt a numbing shock on my neck, in my spinal column, and I almost screamed with agony from the blinding headache that sprang into being. You see, they realized that he was listening in on them, and they were having a conversation over some technology, this ray technology, and they actually hit him with ray technology. So he was hit with a spike ray, and this is not uncommon even to this day. The intelligence agencies who have stolen all this stuff from out of the underground, and probably had wars and stuff down there, like the Dulce Wars, have stolen this kind of technology, and they use this technology on people, usually good people that are trying to bring this out because they work for the corporation basically of Satan. And you can go check out a movie documentary. Look this up. It's called Corporation. Let's see, Corporation, the documentary. And here we
The Corporation is a 2004 movie directed by Mark Akbar, starring Chris Barrett, Michael Moore, and Michaela J. Michael.
Okay. Well, you can go and check that out. But let's move on. So anyway, long story short, he ends up getting thrown into jail, and that's when one of his girlfriend, his later to be girlfriend, Nydia, who's blind, she's from the caverns, comes to free him. The only reason I'm telling you all this is because this is how he gets down in there. So she frees him from jail. So we'll go back to here. So his name is Dick, Richard Shaver. So she frees him, and she brings him down with her friends down to the other Taros that live in the underground. And so what I'm going to explain to you is that she let him see Richard Shaver with imaging equipment over the ray machines, what the bad people were that were down there. So she led me to the Great Hall. This is it right here. Take a photo of that. She led me to the Great Hall where I first met her and paused before one of the mechanisms, her hand on the control. She swung a huge distance ray beam, and almost immediately upon the visi-screen, a scene of utter horror became visible. I could hardly believe my own eyes. My own eyes' evidence. That was hell, a real hell I looked upon. Men hung, swinging from hooks, boiled in fluids, writhed on racks, thirsted in the stocks, sat on spikes, tugging to get off, lay under hammers that crushed them inch by slow inch, or slid inexorably into machines that sliced them gradually with the thinness of a microtome, one of the various instruments used to cut sections for microscopic examinations. Nydia explained the horror, and I got at last the full significance of the legend of hell. You see, they will not allow their victims to die, but keep them alive through every torment by the use of the beneficial rays of the machines that they use. When a man is nearly dead, they place him in one of the vitalizer machines for a day or two, and he is healed up completely. Then they start him through the thing again. Do you see those shriveled bundles at the side? That is how the victims look when they finally do die. We watched in horror for a space of time, and Nydia concluded, some of these men have lived in that torment for 20 years. This is our enemy's pleasure palace. Now remember that, pleasure palace, because these palaces were once great palaces of learning and education and living, and these beings have turned because of the evilness of, apparently, according to Richard Shaver, the heavy metalness that's now burning in our sun because our sun has changed, which changes everything into a dying mode, into a dying sequence, and poisons some people's egos, or all people's egos, to a point where it's now ego controlled. And then when the ego is in control, then fear begins. When fear begins, murder starts to happen. Anyway, back to what Nydia was saying. From immemorial times, they have had such hells in the underworld, and it has never ceased. You see, the surface Christians are not so far wrong in your pictures of hell, except that you do not die in order to go there, but wish for death to release you once you arrive. And they are very careful about letting a victim die, for that would end their fun. There has always been a hell on earth, and this is one of them. Every man who falls into their hands from the caverns or from surface faces one of these torments to the death you witness. It never mentions such things, your newspaper, does it? That bunch of misbegotten spawn of the Ifrit, fears of living men. Now, the Ifrit. So we're going to go down here, and I'm going to take a photo of this. Okay, so this is the page, this page. Okay, so I'm going to read, an Ifrit is a monstrous evil genie or a demon. And then we go down here, we skip down to the bottom of this. It says, they don't even understand the detrimental roboticism, which is the underlying cause of such a horror. The underlying roboticism. Okay, so this is what I was trying to explain. So let's go and read it. The detrimental roboticism, actually the two words from which Darrow is arrived, detrimental roboticism, detrimental energy, and robo is slave, because they row your mind. They row your mind with information, and you're controlled. That's where row your boats come from. Romania, Romans, Ronin, all these things that we've talked about before. Thus it can be seen that the Darrow is a being who is a robot, and here we go, quotations, or a slave That'll come up again later. Robot means slave. To a detrimental process of thinking, a process that always ends in something bad. Darrow people's minds are affected so that their thoughts processes are warped into evil channels. Picture the brain as poisoned, and picture a thought as something that must make its way through the convolutions of this poison. This is not actually what happens, but it is an analogy that will help you to understand. Conceive of the thought as a good thought, such as doing a good deed. But by the time the thought has gone through the brain and transmitted into action, the thought is no longer a good deed, but a bad deed. For instance, you are impelled by your thought to help a blind man across the street, but by the time you get to him to do it, your thought has changed so that you trip him and laugh as he falls into a mud puddle. That is the way a Darrow thinks, and why he always does evil things. His brain is so poisoned by detrimental energy that all his good thoughts end up as bad. Pure thought, say the philosophers, is always good. It is only rendered bad by the effect of a sick human mind. Now that's the editor speaking, so that's Ray Palmer. Okay, so we're going to move on. So what I'm trying to get to is the fact that she uses this thing called thought wire, which is why they use thrones and crowns and scepters. The scepters were actually the device's mechanisms handles, and they would take them out. So if you had a scepter, you were in control of the machine. Only the 13 bloodlines of a group that I'm about to show you, the reptiles, more than likely, and all these people of the underground that are involved with this, with bringing them storage and food and anything else that they need, and trading with them these mechanisms and the technology that's down there, they have become like them, just like the police become like the criminals that they investigate. This is happening. So the Jinn, or the Ifrits, these invisible beings that we hear about through the Islam, the tales of Islam and Muslims. They are real and definitely tied into the underground here. There's another book that you can go read, the Necromancer, and if you read that, he is in Arabia, and he goes down and searches out all this black magic. Eventually, he's eaten by an invisible giant. Now, it turns out invisibility is actually an organic thing that can be part of a person's being. Some of these beings have the ability to hide and to come out of our light. I think it can be developed, possibly born into, not sure. We know that Sasquatches can do it, Bigfoots can do it. These dogmen seem to be able to do it, and many other beings like the crawlers, the werewolves, the crawler being the rake. Anyway, okay, so getting back to this, into the underground he is with his girlfriend Nydia. She seats him in this gigantic chair, which is made for giants, because it was the giants that made him. And she places on his head a crown, electrically stimulated, and there's what she calls thought wire. And this thought wire allows you basically to watch as if you're watching a movie, except that you are looking through the eyes of the being that's living it. And then she turns the machine on. And so the very first ThoughtWire story that he lived through is the story that I'm going to briefly touch down upon, because the reason I'm bringing this story up is because I want to show you the very first beings that touched down here and what they immediately started to do. So we're going to take a look at that. So let's check that out right now. I'll take a photo of this. I was not Richard Shaver, but another man entirely. I stood in a forest of tremendous fern trees. Tremendous because this being is already giant, right? So besides me was a long, enormous cylinder of smoking metal, still hot from its recent passage through the upper air. From it emerged a woman, larger than I, and in her arms she carried a child. The woman was large. So back here, the size doesn't matter. Size is just huge. There is no dying, and people just continue to live until they have to leave the planet. They become so large. The fern trees seemed topless, stretching up until distance made the tremendous fronds seem fragile and delicate to the eye, at last disappearing in the mists. So you couldn't see them. How high it went, miles. In the sky, I could see many cylinders, and knew they were decelerating and would come to rest at last near us. I knew that we were members of an Atlan colonization expedition. Atlan, one of the three major races of space, the other two being the Titans and the Nortons, or the Northens, the Northern Giants, the Frost Giants. Okay, getting back, this is an Atlan colonizing expedition sent to this blazing new sun and its planets where life was furiously fecund, or in other words, growing quickly, capable of developing a crescendo of growth into complex forms that would, from our landing onward, be guided by our skill and wisdom. My ship was the first to land of the colonizers of Planet 3 under the new star named Sol. Now, this totally reminds me of the opening scene of the Alien movie called Prometheus. And what happens there is they drop off one of the giants, Nephilim in this particular instance of that movie, and then he drinks something which totally destroys him on a molecular level, and he dies, basically, and all his DNA material goes into the water source, and then that seeds the planet. Well, that's just a quick version of what is actually happening. That was just a way to speed the process up for the viewers to see. So we get back to Richard Shaver here. Now, remember, this is thousands and thousands of years ago. We don't even know. I'm going to guess this maybe, this is before. This is the people that started Atlantis. So, and you can see that there already is life here, and quite a bit of it if the trees have already grown that high. So even though this is, potentially hundreds of thousands of years ago or millions of years ago, time's a bit weird here because we don't really know about time. But whatever it was, clearly at least hundreds of years have already been going on here beforehand because things are growing. He's touching down into a forest that's miles high. Okay, so we know that this new planet was named Sol, so they're calling it Sol. My ship was the first to land of the colonizers of Planet 3 under the new star named Sol. Put the child back in the ship, Leah, I called to the woman. Then help me get out the materials for our house. The sooner we are safe within its walls, the better, for we can't tell what forms of inimical life may have been developed since the tests were made so long ago by the explorers. Yes, Lord of my heart, she answers, obedient Leah. These are just two random people that are on this first colonization project, apparently. The two of us began to haul out from the cargo compartment of our spaceship the sections that enabled us easily to put up the walls of the new home. And again, I'll take another photo of this, just in case you want to follow along. The two of us began to haul out the cargo. The walls contained giant spiderweb coils, which would set up an impeding magnetic field that would allow only beneficial energy to enter my home. Okay, so here we go. The spiderweb of magnetic of wires. This has been talked about before in the creation of UFOs, so I find this very fascinating. The house walls, once the power was turned into them, set up a huge force field which allowed only waves of a certain frequency to enter the interior. Remember that Tesla said, think in terms of frequency as far as the universe. This particular frequency has been determined upon by exhaustive tests of the beneficial and detrimental content of the electrical and magnetic waves sent out by the star Sol overhead. So the star was setting out a particular frequency, and they'd already tested it, and so they knew exactly what they needed these walls to be. So these walls captured only the intricate growth energy and got rid of the detriment energy, which is later what's poisoning these Darrows that are now in the underground, and that have influenced these satanic families who worship them. From time to time, as I, Dooley, and my wife labored over the rapidly rising structure, other spaceships from out of the void drifted down into the great clearing where we had landed first of all upon this planet, which we called Lemuria, or as the surface men referred to her, as Earth. Now, hang on here. He's already saying there's surface men here. Surface men refer to her as Earth. And these men could actually be the Neanderthal or the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch as we call them. These spaceships were full of fellow colonizers who immediately set about erecting their homes. So here's a story of them building. Are these some of the buildings that are in the underground and the ancient buildings that we still see to this day of Tartaria, which I believe is really parts of Atlantis and this Lemuria? Atlantis, Lemuria, and Tartaria are all sort of the same. Different time periods, and possibly different people, but all working on the same principle of using the earth to house and fuel you, and to only use integrate energy and free energy. Okay, back to this book. These spaceships were full of fellow colonizers who immediately set about erecting their homes, such as Lila and I were doing. Although many days passed, it seemed that no time at all had passed before the pioneers had settled down into more or less regular living in their new environment. The days passed most eventfully, for each one brought immense new vistas of the possibilities that lay in the immensely more fecund and different growth from anything we had known. Within the chambers of that house, I knew those beneficial vibrance from that new sun would very soon build up a very charge of increasing potency, for the waves would enter, but due to the direction of the flux of the field of the walls, would not get out again. So they actually amplified and stayed in there, probably bounced around and fed them. They probably didn't need to eat. Thus, the house Leah and I had skillfully constructed became a great trap for beneficial energy, and within it, we Atlan children would grow very swiftly to great size and immense strength, and best of all, unbounded intelligence. So there it is. Okay, and the editor has a note here, so I'm going to read the note. This thought record story given to Mr. Shaver by Nydia was a logical one to begin his education into the past history of Earth, for it depicts the arrival of the first Atlan colonists on Earth, named by them Lemuria. The reason for colonization was that our sun was then a new sun, still sending out radiations from a carbon fire only, and not from the poisonous heavy metals, which were radium, uranium, polonium, etc., the heavy metals, and was thus a helpful place to live. Isn't it interesting that heavy metal music has all these themes, and it's quite often created to Satan, right? They pledge it to Satan, which is the underground. Okay, so anyway, getting back to this. Even so, the colonists built their homes in a manner to keep out the poisons that cause old age, which might be present in some small quantity. Age is what burns our cells. This radiation burns our cells. This is me talking, and that's what causes age. We're slowly getting poisoned or radiated. That's what age is. Our sun today, and we can reverse it, by the way, from which the Atlans fled 12,000 years ago, because it was causing the disease of old age by projecting minute disintegrants down on the earth in a steady rain, is the answer to the riddle of death our scientists seek to solve, according to Richard Shaver and the editor Ray Palmer. In water, the poisons are present in heavy suspension, especially in thermal springs. In the air, the poison floats forever. With the tiny thistle downs of dust it has infected, and to which it clings, it settles in the leaves of plants, so that we take the poison in with every drink of water, with every breath, with every bite of food, and as a consequence grow, quote-unquote, old by tissue and cell inability to restore itself fully. That's correct, because each cell gives the new cell the blueprint of the old cell. We need to stop that process, and our cells will rejuvenate and will become young again. Age is nothing. Hold on a second. Inability to restore itself fully because of the hindering and ever-present fire of disintegrants from the accumulations of radioactives. Age is nothing but a radium burn, a damage to the living cell so that its functions are gradually stopped and retrograded into restoration by normal process is impossible. So that its functions are gradually stopped and retrograded until restoration by normal processes is impossible. Our normal processes being our immune system. When the cells can no longer renew themselves, we die. Now, flash forward to now, that's why they're poisoning our food. They're trying to speed this process up. When we're dying and trying to stay healthy, which takes up all our lives, most of our time, and we only live to about 60 to 80. So they've really dumbed us down with our food and our water and everything, and they're trying to kill us even faster. Okay, so that was one story, and there's more to that story. I'm just not going to get into it here because I need to get into the underground as far as cloning is concerned. So this next story, okay, so that story is showing that there were men here, that these new beings were giants. They came down, they had ships. I don't know if I should call them spaceships, although they did. There's ships of incredible speed and agility. They can go wherever they want. They built this technology down in here, and they built into the underground. Okay, so we're going to go into another one, and this story is about the Jormungandr, or the worm that encircled the world. And this is something that the elite still used even to this day, where they talk about the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail. And I believe still, even though they're sort of like spinning this as a planet, a spherical planet, I still think there's an argument to be made that we are still on either a much larger planet. I'm talking much larger, millions times larger, or it's just a one big flat planet. But either way, we're in a crater. Now, how the crater got there, if there's nothing out there in space hitting and impacting, I'm not sure. The theory that it was bubbling up from underneath, and that's what caused the craters due to some sort of thermal activity, that could be. But we're talking about a crater the size of the known world that we know of, everything that we know of, and much larger. Hemmed in, surrounded by an ice wall, and all the water laying flat inside the crater. But anyway, okay, so this next story is the Jormungandr, the snake that ate the world. Or they interchanged worm and reptile and snake. In this old language, the worm, just like in the movie Doom, these worms are like snakes. They're gigantic, and this thing had arms and stuff. So anyway, but I'm going to read this story because this is about how the beings back then were of noble nature, and they didn't want to kill. And it was a new type of being, and that's what's important about this story, that did come. And this is much later from the story that I originally read. So this is thousands and thousands of years later. They're already established. They have high technology. They already had it. They brought it with them. But now they're established day-to-day life. As you can see from the last story, it didn't take them long to set up anyway. They're giants, and here we go. We'll start this story. And whoops. Okay, so this is going to read this to you. So we'll take a photo of that. Okay. I became another man. He's in the thought wire again, in the throne. The thrones that the royalty use, they're fake. They might be real. They might have been working at one point, but they use these thrones as thrones, the scepter, and the crown. And it's mimicking the technology of this machine. And one of the things it does here is the thought wire, which allows you to go back in time and to live through the eyes, basically seeing the history as a movie. So here we go. I became another man, a greater being physically. He was a giant. My body was huge, yet I was aware that I was very young in actual years. My sturdy legs were cased in knee boots of glistening gold-colored synthetic leather. Synthetic leather, interesting. So they're making, material that's not natural. My body in a skin-tight covering of overlapping golden scales that formed a flexible protection like armor. Could this be some of the Anunnaki? Atlantis, Anunnaki, maybe, who knows? Upon my head, I wore a scarlet helmet that contained thought detection apparatus. So this is the telog, or the telog stands for telepathy augmenter, or an augmenter being something that you could dial in, dial up, or dial down. I had thought detection apparatus, for I heard voices and movements nearby, although the chamber where I stood seemed empty. One voice sounded, though afar, particularly peremptory. It was a feminine voice, and one that I, Bar Mihat, his name, recognized with a little grimace of half annoyance. I tossed my head petulantly, good grief, so that the red gold hair that fell to my shoulders in shining waves swung loosely with the action. Basically, a clicking mechanism stopped and then was followed by a steady musical hum like the spinning of a giant top. Dim luminosity pulsed about me. In a 4-foot circular mirror above the console, a silvery aura flickered madly to coalesce slowly into the likeness of a young and attractive woman. Her lips moved, and it was then as though she was present in the room with me, for her voice sounded with clarity in my ears. So again, this is a technology. It's like a thought portal growing in front of them. Bar, the thing that is growing faster than our control of it, it actually threatens all life on our planet. Jorgamundr is not a joke. Okay, this is reference to this giant snake, or the worm. And there might have been a few of these. Certainly he's no joke, but why fret yourself? Who are on land about Jorgamundr who lives in the sea? My laugh was loud and free. So he didn't care. They lived on land, and this thing lived in the ocean. As long as he's kept to the sea, why should I worry about him? It is because he is creeping out of the sea that I am disturbed. His body now completely encircles the earth. His tentacles have spread over half the unsettled portion of Afrique, which is so close to Afrit. So interesting, but that is the old term of Africa, Afrique. They are 100 leagues long, and they grow continually for food. So this thing was gigantic. We're talking thousands of miles long. And you can still to this day see proof on Africa that there were things that lived there. Okay, so remember, we're telling this story because I want to showcase how this group of beings didn't like to kill, and they wouldn't avoid it if they possibly could. And that a new type of entity had shown up, and they immediately went to war. Okay, so anyway, so he goes on to talk about dis rays, and that they could take the worm out, but they didn't like killing. So let's see if I can find that. Sorry, dead air here. Looking through here. Okay, so here he goes on to say, I had recollections of my home city, Atlantis, colloquially called Asgard. Okay, so we've heard of all this through the tales. Not far south of Ganiga Gap, a canyon of abysmal depth to the north and east, separating the civilized area of the Northlands from the Darklands, as the wild and practically unexplored lands of the giants were called. So there was even greater beings here, and these beings weren't part of the Atlantis. So this is so strange. And we get into the tales of the Yggdrasil, which is the tree of life, which grew down deep into the underground and high into the heavens, think miles. We've got Cerberus, who guarded Hades, which is a hell dog, of which Anubis is part of, the Cenocephali, and of course nowadays the dogman and the werewolf. A quick point on that is, these beings are trying to destroy America and all countries, really, but they need to take America out as the final takedown. And the only thing that's stopping them from sending other countries in, like China and Russia, are actually the dogman. It's not nuclear weaponry. We don't even know if nuclear weaponry is real. There's a huge story all around that, huge anomalies, but the dogman is being used by these shadowy intelligence groups to protect protect our land. They're everywhere, actually. They don't really follow. This is getting sideways here. But there are many stories of them being used by the military. Anyway, I've actually seen video of it. It's not pretty, let me tell you. Anyway, okay, so Bar Mihat, that's his name. I'm just going through here. I just wanted to. Anyway, so it says here. What he did was he proposed. Okay, so here he's talking to the Jargamunder, whose name is Garm, because I think there was a Jargamunder before him. But anyway, that's for another day. So I'll start here. I pondered the great being's bitter words, and at last I spoke thoughtfully. Oh, right. Here Garm talks about Odin. I think it was Odin that supposedly, as the story goes, slayed Jargamunder, but that's not exactly what happened according to this. The voice of Garm, and he was listening to Garm through the telog, which is the crown on his head that helped him hear thoughts from this being, which is this gigantic being, this snake, worm. Once a man of your line went a-fishing. Yes, I recognize you of one of Thor's line. Okay, it was Thor. For a joke, I took the bait between my jaws and raised up my head near his skiff. I think he baited it with a horse or something, a horse head. He was, like all of your blood, a stubborn fellow, and he pulled the bottom out of his boat, trying vainly to land me. At least that was his pretense. After I carried him ashore on my back, we talked for a long, lovely time. He sitting in the sand, and I with my head lying in the sandy beach beside him. He told me a tale of another such serpent, another Jorgamunder, as myself, grown too long for comfortable living on his birthplace, and he predicted that the same fate lay in store for me unless I found death by some other means. That great serpent encircled earth as do I, and when the time came that abundant food was no longer available, he took his own tail between his jaws, the Ouroboros, and swallowed it, and after many years he died thus. He killed himself by eating himself. It may be that I shall do that thing, though of late I do not love men or their doings. Okay, so then he goes on. Then this becomes Bar Meat's answer. I pondered the great being's bitter words, and at last I spoke thoughtfully. You must know something of our thought magic, Garm. If you will do that thing the other great serpent did, we will arrange that before you do it, you shall have many weeks of continual pleasure dreams. They're going to send him stimulation rays, which calms and gives you good stimulation. It gives you good feelings, like a drug, really. You shall sense in dreams, as it goes on, glorious matings and victorious struggles. We will give you the equivalent of many lives of pleasure. This will take much energy that we could well spend elsewhere, but it will be worth it to us to rid us of your overgrowing, enormous appetite that is becoming so destructive. And anyway, that goes on, and he says, the great serpent answers him, Garm. He says, if your dream makers deal honorably with me, so will I deal with you. And so they made a pact. But what happens here is, I don't know if I'll find it, but what ends up happening is it changes because Garm, the Jorgamunder, the worm, ends up giving Bar Mihat, the Atlan giant, some information of these new beings that are here, these evil beings that have touched down. And you will soon find out that they're actually reptiles. And so that is what we're dealing with even to this day. These reptiles that live in the underground. Thus it was that I talked with the worm that encircled the world, and thus it came to pass that Garm told me of things that I knew were true, For I had seen that flight of strange planes that headed for the dense forest that we Atlantis had thus far left practically unexplored. So there were lands here that they didn't explore, and there were men there, and giants. And whether the men were the giants, he doesn't make clear. Strange outlanders, this is the worm talking, came over my seas in great ships and hovered long, sending me their promises of many dreams, as you have done. But they did not ask for my death, Barmihat. They asked for my living aid. I learned somewhat of their dreams, and their dreams are not my kind of dreams, Barmihat of the old line of Thor. There is no light laughter, and there are no gallant young ones with them. They weren't noble. Their lives have such miseries of everlasting warring. I want no part of such wretched dreams. But they had a ray which they can put over any part of my body, and through that ray control me. Does that sound familiar? Possession. So when I gave no consent to their supplications, they forced a part of me to lay waste such portions of Afrique as lies between the two great rivers. So if you seek them out where they have hidden themselves within the dark lands, you will know whence any coming troubles sources. I have seen their great ships, Garm. I knew them from Outlanders. We shall take steps at once. Okay, so he's warned by Garm, and then they go into war with these beings. And actually, Garm comes to their rescue. They make a pact with Garm that they will save his consciousness and allow him to live again somewhere else. And so he goes for that, and then he helps save them from these forces, which end up being reptiles. I'm going to go ahead and stop it here because we're at 46 minutes, and I'm barely into like the real stories of the underground that I need to get into. Okay, so we'll continue this in another video, so I will stop here.